Hey everyone, I'm Justin with Ohio State Legal Services Association. Dealing with the IRS can be overwhelming and stressful. There's a Taxpayer Bill of Rights that is there to guide the IRS's interactions with taxpayers in their general practices. There's a law that requires that the IRS strive to ensure that the rights contained there are protected. I'm here with the low-income taxpayer clinics at Southeastern Ohio Legal Services and the Legal Aid Society of Columbus. They have experience dealing with the IRS and some practical tips to go along with our explanation of these rights. Do you guys want to introduce yourselves?
Hi, I'm Kathy Hoover with the Legal Aid Society of Columbus, and I'm a staff accountant here, attorney here on the Low Income Taxpayer Clinic.
Hi, I'm Luke Weinick. I'm a staff attorney for the Low Income Taxpayer Clinic for Southeastern Ohio Legal Services.
Hi, I'm Melissa Skilder. I am the director of the Low Income Taxpayer Clinic at Southeastern Ohio Legal Services.
And I'm Megan Sullivan, the director of the Low Income Taxpayer Clinic at the Legal Aid Society of Columbus. We're going to talk about these 10 rights and what they mean to you.
So first off, you have the right to be informed. Taxpayers have the right to know what they need to do to comply with the tax laws. They are entitled to clear explanations of the tax laws and IRS procedures in all tax forms, instructions, publications, notices, and correspondence. They have the right to be informed of the IRS decisions about their tax accounts and to receive clear explanations of the outcomes. Notices are sent from the IRS to taxpayers on various tax issues, changes, or amounts due. They generally have which office sent the notice and a phone number to call with questions. If you are unsure of what a notice is trying to say or what it means, you can look the notice number up online for a general description. The IRS does have a vast website with information, tax rules and procedures, and frequently asked questions. You can search the pages using the search box at the top of the main page. Also, everyone has the right to sign up for an irs.gov account where they can see the history of their accounts through their transcripts. There are 3 transcripts you can view: your account transcript, your wage and income transcript for the last 10 years, and your tax return transcript for the past 3 years. You can also make a payment and see some copies of notices in this account. While the IRS is so difficult to get on the phone these days, these transcripts especially can be your easiest option for staying updated on your tax situation.
Next, taxpayers have the right to receive quality service. So taxpayers have the right to receive prompt, courteous, and professional assistance in their dealings with the IRS, to be spoken to in a way that they can easily understand, to receive clear and easily understandable communications from the IRS, and to speak to a supervisor about inadequate service. During the 2022 filing season, the IRS received about 73 million telephone calls. Only 1 out of 10 calls reach an IRS employee. The average hold time for calls is 29 minutes. However, we have experienced holds as long as an hour and a half. We have found that if you call early in the morning or call several times in a row, you may be successful in speaking to an agent. Also, given the backlog of calls, it has been difficult to speak to a supervisor about inadequate service. Instead, the agent will process a call back with the supervisor, and sometimes you will receive that call, but other times you may not. So I know what you may be thinking. If I mail in my response instead of calling the IRS, that will resolve the problem sooner. Unfortunately, that's wrong. Currently, it's taken the IRS an average of 251 days, or more than 8 months, to process correspondence. This has more than tripled the processing time of 74 days in 2019, which was the most recent pre-pandemic year. Therefore, our advice would be to be diligent in following up with the IRS. You may need to try calling several times a day or in a week, and it will be frustrating hearing, due to the call volume, we were unable to handle your call at this time, but you will find success, and just be diligent in calling them.
You also have the right to pay no more than the correct amount of tax. Taxpayers have the right to pay only the amount of tax legally due, including interest and penalties, and to have the IRS apply all tax payments properly. If you find a mistake on a return and you owe because of it, you can amend your return to reduce the tax as long as the IRS is still able to collect the tax. We'll talk a little bit later about how long that is, but it's 10 years. If you overpaid, the IRS will refund excess payments if they're claimed within 2 years of the payment or 3 years of the due date of the return that you're challenging, whichever is longer. For example, your 2021 return was due on April 15th or thereabouts, 2022. If you made a mistake on your return and overpaid tax, you can file an amended return to get a refund on that for 3 years from the due date, so April 15th, 2025. However, let's say you filed a 2021 return with a large amount of tax due, you entered into a payment plan and are still paying on it on May 1st, 2026, when you realize you made a mistake. You can still amend the return to reduce the amount of tax, and the IRS will refund the amounts of the payments you paid on or after May 1st, 2024.
Taxpayers also have the right to challenge the IRS's position and to be heard. Taxpayers have the right to raise objections and to provide additional documentation in response to formal IRS actions or proposed actions, to expect that the IRS will consider their timely objections and documentations promptly and fairly, and to receive a response from the IRS if the IRS does not agree with their position. When you get a notice from the IRS that says you owe a tax, it's not the last word. There are almost always ways to object to the first notice you receive from the IRS about an issue. For example, before a tax is assessed during an exam, the IRS must send several notices before the tax is put on the books. And in many cases, they must send a notice of deficiency that gives you the right to petition tax court and try your case before a tax court judge before they can make the assessment. There's, excuse me, sorry. There are some items that the IRS looks at that don't qualify for an exam. Watch our video about responding to the IRS math error notices for more about that. That video was posted on April 22nd, and it's called Notice from the IRS, Don't Panic. Many times we see taxpayers feel overwhelmed by the IRS processes or believe that there's no hope in presenting their case. In our experience, these challenges are worth the time worth the time of a taxpayer that has a valid argument.
You also have the right to appeal an IRS decision in an independent forum. Taxpayers are entitled to a fair and impartial administrative appeal of most IRS decisions, including many penalties, and have the right to receive a written response regarding the Office of Appeals decision. Taxpayers generally have their right to take their case to court. An independent forum means that if a taxpayer is examined and does not agree with the final decision of the examiner, they have the right to appeal to someone not already involved in the case. When the matter is appealed, it is re-examined by an independent party or department of the IRS that looks at the issue with no direct input from the first examiner. If after appeals reviews the case and a taxpayer still feels the decision is incorrect, they can take their case to tax court and have a judge oversee their case in court, and you can present evidence of their position. The tax court is not as scary as it sounds. While it is a court and it is a trial, it is somewhat more relaxed than a regular court. And if your balance is less than $50,000, you can also elect a small case proceeding that is far less informal than even a regular tax court case.
As Megan mentioned earlier, you do have the right to finality. Taxpayers have the right to know the maximum amount of time they have to challenge the IRS's position, as well as the maximum amount of time the IRS has to audit a particular tax year or collect a tax debt. Taxpayers have the right to know when the IRS has finished an audit. IRS notices, including the notice that gives you the right to petition the tax court, will state the time that you have to respond. The deadline to petition the tax court for examination issues is 90 days from the date on the notice. It is different to petition based on collection due process hearings and other issues, so please read your notice concisely. In most cases, the IRS has 3 years from when you file your tax return to assess additional tax. If your tax return is due on April 15th, but you file early, the time runs exactly 3 years after the due date, not the filing date. However, if you get an extension to October 15th, your 3-year runs from that date. On the other hand, if you file late and do not have an extension, the time is 3 years following your actual late filing date. If your return includes a substantial understatement of income, it generally means that you have left off more than 25% of your gross income, or if you overstate your basis in property, the IRS has up to 6 years to examine your return. Now, what if you file a return that's fraudulent or you never file a return? then the IRS has no time limit if you never file a return or if it can prove civil or criminal fraud. If you file a return, can the IRS ever claim that you didn't? And the answer is yes. If you didn't sign a return, the IRS does not consider it a valid tax return. That means the 3 years can never start to run. Another big no-no is if you alter the penalties of perjury language at the bottom of the return. If you alter that language, it also means that the tax return does not count. For balance due matters, the IRS has 10 years from the date you file the return or from when the tax is assessed, whichever is later, to collect the taxes you owe. That time is extended by the amount of time you have pending in bankruptcy and collection due process hearings, and while the IRS is deciding whether you qualify for an installment agreement or other collection actions.
You also have the right to privacy. Taxpayers have the right to expect that any IRS inquiry, examination, or enforcement action will comply with the law and be no more intrusive than necessary, and will respect all due process rights, including search and seizure protections, and will provide, where applicable, a collection due process hearing. The IRS can't seize certain personal items, such as necessary school books, clothing, furniture, and household items. They also can't seize your primary home without court approval. It also must show there's no reasonable alternative way to collect the tax debt from you. If the IRS is going to take a collection action, like levying or garnishing your wages or a bank account, you have the right to appeal, like Kathy discussed above, for examination issues. That's called the request for a collection due process hearing. The standard for appeal is whether the IRS is taking an action that's more intrusive than necessary. That means not taking your property if you qualify for a voluntary payment plan or for hardship relief that will pause collections altogether. You trigger that protection by requesting a collection due process hearing within 30 days of receiving a final notice of intent to levy or a notice of federal tax lien filing. If you meet that deadline, you also get the protection of tax court review of the appeals decision. If you miss that deadline by more than a year, you can't get a collection due process hearing, but the IRS will still work with you on collection and balancing that right.
Next is the right to confidentiality. This is a bedrock principle for the IRS. Taxpayers have the right to expect that any information they provide to the IRS will not be disclosed to other parties unless authorized by the taxpayer or by law. The right to confidentiality means that the IRS won't give any information to a third party without permission from the taxpayer, again, unless there's a specific provision that allows them to do so under federal law. The agency can't contact third parties such as an employer or bank for information unless they give the taxpayer reasonable notice first. And the confidentiality, the same confidentiality a taxpayer has with an attorney also applies to tax professionals working with the IRS on the taxpayer's behalf. Taxpayers also have the right to expect appropriate action will be taken against employees, return preparers, and others who wrongfully use or disclose taxpayer return information.
You also have the right to retain representation. Taxpayers have the right to retain an authorized representative of their choice to represent them in their dealings with the IRS. Taxpayers have the right to seek assistance from a low-income taxpayer clinic if they cannot afford representation. It can be an overwhelming and scary experience to even just have to call the IRS, let alone work with them through an exam or if you owe money. While it's possible to work with the IRS directly, you do have the right to have representation. A credentialed, that means they are a CPA, attorney, or enrolled agent, representative will work with you in the IRS to help get the result you need. They will argue your side of the case and work with the IRS to provide them with the documentation and information necessary for you. If you meet certain income guidelines, generally your income is less than 250% of the federal poverty line, you can contact your local LITC. LITCs are available to work with tax issues, tax controversies, and collection alternatives. They do not provide tax preparation services, but can help with many tax issues. They are generally free or for a small fee and can help with a resolution with the IRS. You can find your nearest LITC by visiting irs.gov/LITC. Should you not qualify for an LITC, there are many private attorneys, CPAs, and enrolled agents you can hire to help you as well. Although generally CPAs and enrolled agents cannot represent you in tax court, they can work with the IRS on tax issues and collections. Should you hire someone privately, please check to make sure they are credentialed and get a written statement of any fees and what they will represent you in upfront.
And finally, taxpayers have the right to a fair and just tax system. Taxpayers have the right to expect the tax system to consider facts and circumstances that might affect their underlying liabilities, ability to pay, or ability to provide information timely. Taxpayers have the right to receive assistance from the Taxpayer Advocate Service if they are experiencing financial difficulty or if the IRS does not resolve their tax issues properly and timely through its normal channels.
The IRS has many procedures in place to make things more fair for individual taxpayers, and when all else fails in the system, the Taxpayer Advocate Service is a great resource to stop unreasonable actions by the IRS.
But still, it's important to note that the tax system is not always fair, that the IRS does not always live up to this requirement. There's a tax gap in America. A tax gap is the difference between the amount of taxes actually due and the amount of tax that is actually paid overall. The majority of that gap can be traced to wealthy households. A smaller percentage of the tax gap can be traced to lower wage households, meaning that low-income people are more likely to actually pay the tax that's due. Lower wage households are also more likely to be the households of color due to the United States history of laws and economic policies that are racist on their face or have a disproportionate negative impact on Black, Indigenous, and other people of color.
Even though lower wage households are less responsible for the tax gap, the IRS audits them at a much higher rate. The IRS, at the direction of Congress, targets their efforts on policing claims for the Earned Income Tax Credit and other credits that are designed to bring needed resources into lower wage households. When the IRS conducts these audits, they conduct them largely by mail. If the IRS does not get a response to their letters, they often automatically deny the credit or assess a debt, removing resources from the community that need them without any actual finding that the taxpayer wasn't eligible for the credits they claimed.
What if the taxpayer does not, or what if the IRS does not respect this Bill of Rights for the taxpayer? There are some things that you can do. You can respond to the mail that the IRS sends you, appeal when you get the wrong answer, contact a tax professional or low-income taxpayer clinic. When talking to the IRS, you can ask to speak to managers or supervisors, and you can contact the Taxpayer Advocate Service. Their contact information is available through the irs.gov website.
You can also register the issue in the system called the Systemic Advocacy Management System. If you search the IRS website, you'll find a link where you can report the problem that you're experiencing. Finally, you can contact your congressperson to tell them about your experience with the IRS, to ask them to help you fix a problem, or to let them know what you think about the IRS or other policies and how they affect you.
All right, thanks, Kathy, Luke, Megan.